Christmas night 1972, BBC Two transmitted a remarkable play. It was part of their Ghost Story for Christmas series. Not a traditional ghost story that they'd done in the past, but it was something a bit more modern, a bit more sophisticated. The ghost stories have always been a well-regarded part of the BBC's Christmas festive TV lineup. And of course, it's a thread that has been resurrected in recent years by Mark Gatiss, who's created these low-budget half-hour chillers, which are never mind-blowing, but they're entertaining for half an hour on Christmas Eve when you're waiting for the big day. Christmas 1972 was something a little bit different, because the BBC commissioned the great Nigel Kneale, and there is a bit of a Nigel Kneale theme on this channel lately. I've just reviewed his 1957 film, The Abominable Snowman, and come 1972, Kneale had fallen out of love a little bit with the BBC. They'd created his Quatermass serials and certain other projects that he'd done, but I think he was a bit disillusioned and disenchanted. But he was approached to write something for Christmas, and it's called The Stone Tape. And I've been meaning to watch this for ages. Now, again, it's one of those things that I can't recall having seen before. And having watched it, you would think it might have lodged itself in my memory a little bit better. But I can't say that watching it last night as I did, that I really remembered it. But I've seen it at last, and I think it's time we talked about it. Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. My name is B. Paramount. Christmas 1972. BBC Two then showed The Stone Tape, a 90-minute, quite intense, creepy horror drama from Nigel Kneale. Not something you can imagine the BBC doing today. As I mentioned, they still have the ghost stories, but they're much lower profile than they were back in the 60s and 70s, when they were a sort of a Christmas event. And certainly The Stone Tape was something slightly different, because it didn't fit within the normal remit of the ghost stories that they showed. And it was a much more sophisticated and thought-provoking drama than you might normally expect, particularly on a Christmas night, which tends to be fairly light entertainment for the family, or dramas that don't frighten the horses. I think The Stone Tape allegedly frightened quite a lot of people. It was the work of the great Nigel Kneale, and he's come up quite a lot on this channel. In fact, will come up quite a bit more when I do the Quatermass films and serials in due course. A huge talent and an incredibly important person in the shape of science fiction on British television. And The Stone Tape is a 90-minute film that stars Michael Bryant, Jane Asher, Michael Bates, and a number of well-known British supporting actors. I'll get to them shortly. It's a story that follows not exactly obsessions, but themes that Nigel Kneale was quite keen on in his science fiction / horror stories, which were stories that pitted superstition and eerie, ghostly things with modernity and science and technology. And that's exactly what this does. I think it's better shown here than in anything else in his oeuvre. It's a 90-minute film in which Peter Brock, played by Michael Bryant, a very well-regarded character actor at the time, probably best known for quite an intense drama series from a couple of years earlier called The Roads to Freedom. He plays a selfish and petulant head of a research team for Ryan Electric Products. His team are developing a new recording medium which they hope will give the company the edge over Japan, which of course is making huge advances in technology. There is one slightly unfortunate sequence where one of the characters puts on false teeth and does a very embarrassing Japanese accent. Don't think you get away with that today. They moved into a new facility in an old country house called Tascalands, Victorian mansion that's been renovated for them to use for their research. One room, however, hasn't been renovated. It's a room that's got a boarded up wall. Behind that wall, which is covered in like this mould and fungus, they find this flight of steps. It's not been refurbished because the builders have heard that it's haunted and they believe that it's haunted. This room is a remnant of the original building, which has been added to and built over and extended over the years, but the foundations actually date back quite a long time, to the Saxon times. The researchers, curious by the fact that the builders wouldn't do work on the room, start exploring the room, and they hear sounds, a woman running, and then this strange, gut-wrenching, terrified scream. One of the computer programs, Jill Greeley, she's played by Jane Asher, she's particularly emotionally sensitive. And she not only hears these sounds, she sees something. She sees a woman running up the stairs in the room and falling, apparently to her death. And they discover that in the late 19th century, a maid in the mansion did in fact tumble and fall and kill herself on those stairs. What the film actually then is about is this concept of stone actually being a recording medium in itself, a stone tape. Now, bearing in mind that Peter Brock and his team are trying to find a new recording method, they become very excited when they begin to realise that the stone in the room has somehow recorded and absorbed and kept these sounds and images that Jane Asher's character is particularly sensitive to. And they become very excited at the thought that this could be the revolution in recording techniques that they really are looking for, the ability for stone to record and re-record. As the story then progresses, they bombard this room with all sorts of electronic equipment to try and record the sounds. They hear it, but they can't record it. Jane Asher's character can see this vision and she hears the sounds, and a lot of them hear the sounds, but the recording equipment doesn't pick it up. And then they realise, as I said, that it's the stone itself that is the recording facility. They can't record what that is recorded, but that's been embedded in the stone. And then that leads to quite a chilling climax when they decide to abandon the whole project because it's untenable, it doesn't suit their purposes. Jill is summarily sacked by Peter Brock, and as they're wrapping up their equipment and packing everything away, she goes back into the room one more time when we find out not only is the stone of the walls a recording facility, it's rewritable, and she uncovers something that's actually been recorded underneath the scream of the girl who died in the 19th century. It's a fascinating story. It's a fascinating piece of drama. Fascinating for all sorts of reasons. It's hugely old-fashioned. Obviously, it's made in 1972. It's quite stagey. It's mainly interiors. There's a couple of exterior sequences at the beginning, which establishes where the thing is taking place, but the rest of it is indoors, in these computer rooms or in Peter Brock's accommodation, but mainly in this room, this chamber with the stairs. So it's quite claustrophobic in a sense, but it does have that staginess that comes with BBC studio productions in the 60s and 70s, and I've spoken before about that sort of videotape quality that things have, that they're quite intimate, that makes you feel that you're part of it, but it does make it feel a bit theatrical. And I think that the acting is quite theatrical as well, because it's very shouty. Everyone's shouting quite a lot, and not exactly overacting, but it's very, very emotional and very charged. And there are some scenes which are done, and I can understand why they were done, because it does create a sort of a sense of believability about it, where all the characters are grouped in one room, they're all talking over each other, and it's quite skillfully done in that characters have bits of dialogue in the background while the main characters are talking, other people are saying things. There's one scene which is a sort of party scene when they think that the stone tape facility is going to revolutionise recording, and there's a party and everyone's shouting, and it is so loud. It is so loud. All these actors all yapping, all saying different bits of dialogue, and Peter Brock goes off to answer a phone call from his wife, and all you can hear is this wall of sound from all the other characters talking. It is very realistic, because that's what happens when groups of people are together at a party or a gathering. People will be talking over one another. You'll pick up snippets of dialogue, snippets of conversation, and it's quite odd because these days drama is quite structured in that somebody speaks and somebody else speaks and somebody else speaks. You don't get that sort of buzz of talk and characters speaking in the background. That doesn't tend to happen so much in modern dramas. And I found that not exactly jarring, but it was a bit, I wasn't expecting it, because, as I say, it's not what we get with drama today. And it was a bit disconcerting to have that sort of wall of sound, which was a bit disorienting. As for whether it's scary or not, it's hard, isn't it? Because we've become inured to horror. The world itself is a horrifying enough place these days. So it's hard to know where horror films and TV fit into that sort of equation, especially old horror films and TV. Obviously, this is a 1972 BBC production. It's quite low budget. The video effects are very primitive. You get a shot of a clearly superimposed girl on top of the stairs. I think it's quite creepy at the end when Jill uncovers something else. And that's brought to the screen by lots of sort of coloured images and overlaid over the picture and shapeless things appearing, which is quite well done. It is all very early 1970s BBC video effects. There's similar sort of things you would see in Doctor Who, for example. But it's not about that. It's not about the visuals. It's not about the special effects. It's about what you take from the story. And I think the idea of this recordable tape absorbing historical things and replaying them over and over again, that's an interesting idea, an interesting concept. And in fact, apparently, because I was reading up on this, this sort of thing where historical events are replayed in certain situations, certain locations, that's now known as the stone tape theory. It sort of tails back to this, where people have theorized that certain places where emotional things happened or tragic things have happened can retain an imprint of that incident. Now, I don't know whether that's just spooky nonsense or whether there's some element of potential truth or scientific reality to it. I don't know. But it is called the stone tape theory, that certain places retain vestiges of the past. And that's a great idea, and that's what powers this. And that's what makes this interesting and fascinating, rather more than any scares. Because it isn't particularly scary, because it's just over 50 years old, and it comes across as a 52-year-old BBC drama. But that isn't to say it is not very well done. It is very well done. The acting is, as I say, it's very mannered and very shouty, very RP, and very theatrical. But it works as a piece of drama. There's lots of naturalism in the dialogue, in the way people speak and behaviours and so on, which carries it through the artificial sort of staginess of it all. But as I say, what makes it work is that core idea, which is so fascinating and so well put forward and so well explained, actually. A lot of these sort of things just vaguely hint at something, but this sort of explains front and centre, you know, this is what we think is happening here, and here's the realisation of it on screen. The terrific acting, generally. I mean, Jane Asher is very good. In an understated performance, actually, is Jill. She doesn't have a great deal of dialogue compared to some of the other characters, but she's quite pivotal, obviously, because she's the sensitive computer programmer who's aware of all this, and she's the one who opens up this can of worms. Michael Bryant is a terrific actor. I mentioned the supporting cast, Michael Bates, who went on to appear in It Ain't Half Hot Mum and Last of the Summer Wine before he tragically passed away in 1978, I think it was. You will recognise some of the supporting actors. I think we have an actor called John Forgem, who appeared as mechanic Jim Baines in the classic, and I use the word loosely, soap opera Crossroads. Tom Chadbourne, a very good character actor. He appeared in The Liver Birds. He appeared in a couple of Doctor Who's. He turned up in lots of things over the years. And we have James Cosmo, an actor who is still with us today, in his 70s or 80s. Still does lots of work now, horror films. He was in Game of Thrones, all sorts of things. He's in this as well as a sort of a youthful scientist part of the team. What strikes me about this, having done a bit of research on it, is how quickly it was put together. It was commissioned. Nigel Kneale delivered his script in September. They did some location filming in November, went into the studio for a couple of days in November, and it was all wrapped up in a few days. Directed by Peter Sasdy. Now, he was a very well-known director who had done a lot of Hammer horror films, and he brings that ethos to this, I think. And earlier in the year, he had been responsible for the Doomwatch film, which was released in April 1972, which I referred to in my recent retro TV review of Doomwatch, which you might want to go back and have a little look at. So, Stone Tape over the years has this reputation as this classic piece of British horror, and I think it's deserved. I think if you watched it at the time, it probably would have more of an impact on you than watching it for the first time now. I can't remember having ever seen this before. So, for me, watching it now 50 odd years later, I'm probably more aware of any production sort of issues and the staginess, as I mentioned, that sort of theatrical element to it. But I can see that this would have been quite unnerving, especially on Christmas night, for people watching this. And especially, I think the end sequence is quite creepy, because what is uncovered there isn't something recognisably human. It's not a monstrous, but it's strange shapes and images and sounds that bring the story to its conclusion. I think it is a classic piece of television. I mean, whether I think it is or not, it is regarded as a classic piece of television. And I recommend you track it down if you can. It's coming out, I think, on a Blu-ray towards the end of the month. It's already come out in a deluxe edition with all the usual bump that you get, leaflets and posters and special cardboard boxes. I think that's now unavailable, but it's coming out on a more basic Blu-ray with special supporting features coming out at the end of this month, I think. So if you are interested in the history of genre television, and if you're watching this channel, I'd like to think you are, then I can recommend this. It's an interesting curio, and I can understand how it's built up its reputation based on the reputation it had at the time. Interestingly, this was intended for a supernatural drama strand that the BBC had at the time. Oh, for the days when the BBC would do stuff like that, instead of detectives and murder investigations again and again. They had a strand called Dead of Night that was produced by Innes Lloyd, a former producer of Doctor Who. It was originally intended for that, but then it was sort of promoted to become a Christmas ghost story. And then, in fact, it was so successful that it led to a run of series called Plays for Tomorrow, which came out a couple of years later, which was 6 sort of science fiction, fantasy one-offs that the BBC transmitted sometime later. So it's quite an important sort of piece of drama, really, because it was standalone at the time when standalone horror things probably weren't all that common on television. They're certainly not now. So I think it is a very important piece of drama. Whatever you think of it now, you may well watch it now and think, well, I don't get it. It's very creaky. It is, yes, but I think you have to step back a little bit and put yourself in 1972, if you can do your own personal time travelling, and imagine people not used to the sort of sophisticated stuff we get these days, watching this on a cold Christmas night and being quite creeped out by it. And although it didn't creep me out, because as I've said before, I'm made of tough stuff, it is eerie and it's edgy and it's very wordy, it's very talky, and I think it deserves its place as a classic in British genre television. As I said, it's available at the end of this month on a standard Blu-ray, and the deluxe edition is now out of print. That's the Stone Tape from 1972. Right, thank you for watching this video. I do hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know if you have. Leave a comment down below if you've seen the Stone Tape. And I did have a message left from somebody when I announced I was doing this week, who said they remembered it. So people do remember this. If you've seen the Stone Tape, why not leave a comment down below? Let me know what you think of it. And if you haven't seen it, I would recommend you picking up the Blu-ray, because it is worth a look. Right, like and subscribe to the channel, please. That's the most important message that you should be taking away from this video. If you're watching this on your big TV, you won't be able to subscribe to the channel. So when you finish this, switch off, get your phone out, get your tablet or your laptop or your desktop or whatever it is, log on to YouTube, find this channel, press like and subscribe. That's all you have to do. It doesn't cost you a penny, and you can watch the long history of about 500 videos I've done over the past few years. Or you don't have to watch them. You just subscribe to the channel. That works for me. Right, I will see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.